Don't you know that cultures have different values? I mean, sure, what's right for you is right for you, but it's not right for everybody. I mean, values change over time. What we thought was once right is now completely wrong. I mean, we were burning witches. We had people as slaves at one point. So let me ask you this. Is there really such a thing as objective moral truths? Are there absolute wrongs and absolute rights? Or is it just all relative to people and cultures? Do the things that are right and the things that are wrong change over time? And that's what we'll be looking at today on OTNC. So we'll see you soon. Hi everybody, welcome back. And last week we left off on this idea that truth matters. And truth matters because our ideas have consequences. What you believe about the real world will be ultimately lived out by you in the real world. And those ideas have consequences. I mean, if you believe that sex is just a physical thing, well then you'll probably live that out in your daily life. And trust me, that idea has consequences. If you believe that cars will always stop when you cross the road, well, you'll probably live that out and that will have its own consequences. I mean, maybe you'll get through life okay, but God forbid that you ever get hit by a car, or even worse, if that car that hits you kills you. And it was all because those ideas that you had about crossing the street, they had consequences. What you believed, you ultimately lived out, and there are consequences to that. I know I've said like consequences like 7 times already, and it sounds really obnoxious. I'm sorry. Consequences. But those ideas don't stop there. I mean, what you believe about God, that's ultimately how you're going to live your life out. If you believe there is no God, well, there are going to be some repercussions to that, not only in this world, but in eternity. And sometimes, living for God or not for God can look a lot the same, because there are a lot of moral, good, pure people out there who have no idea of what it means to live for God. But this raises a good question though, is like, what is good and what is moral and what is pure? Who defines those things? We all have this moral dilemma that we want to live a good life. We want to live a pure life. We want to live a life that's fulfilling. But the question is, what exactly is that? Who defines that? Is it us? Is it our government? Is it our culture? Is it evolution? Is it science? Like, who decides? I mean, when you go out into the real world, you live as though there are laws and there are rules that everyone should follow. But again, the question is, who makes up those rules? And who says that those are good rules to follow? Or who says that those are bad rules to follow? Who says to do those things and not do those things? I mean, is it relative to people that you kind of make up your own truth? What's true for you is true for you. What's true for me? Well, it might not be true for you, but I mean, it's true for me. Or is it a thing where it's like might makes right? The person who has the most power makes the rules, which everyone else will follow because, well, they have the most power. And if you don't follow them, bad things will happen. Or is it something completely different? I mean, is it something so transcendent that it has nothing to do with any type of human invention? It surpasses humans. It's outside of our realm of understanding or universe. It's something out there. So where do we start with this issue? I think I want to start with just some common ground, and that common ground being, I think we can all kind of look at ourselves and say that we live our lives where we go out and we make certain moral judgments. I mean, even the worst of the worst can, make a moral call on something. I mean, even the worst of the worst can say like, I'll do a favor for that guy only because I know that they'll owe me in the end. Yeah, it's good for me to do this favor for him, because then he'll owe me, and if he doesn't do the favor that I want, that's bad. You see, even the bad guy deals with the moral dilemma. You can't escape it. Morals and ethics are everywhere. And with these morals and with these ethics and with these laws of oughts and do's and don'ts and do's, do those things point us to God, or do they point us to something else? I mean, can morality and ethics and values, can those things be explained by science or evolution or something other than God? Spoiler alert, I actually believe that moral absolutes do point us to God, but there are people who disagree on if there even are moral truths that exist out there, meaning that they don't actually believe that there are things that are absolutely wrong, or there are things that are absolutely right. You just kind of make up your own morality. But I'll come back to that. And for a second, I just want to look at how science is really incapable of giving us morality. And it's not just me saying this, and it's not just Christians saying this, but the scientific community also recognizes this. They also recognize that science can't explain morality or ethics or values. Richard Dawkins, who's this evolutionary biologist and an atheist, says, morality is a problem for everyone, and he can't really explain it, but he knows that people ought to live a certain way, but where that's founded at is almost a mystery for him. Richard Dawkins would say something like, science isn't in the business of making moral judgment calls, but it is in the business of helping people show those inconsistencies when it comes to so-called moral claims. And to be honest, he's right about that. Science isn't in the business of making moral judgments, but when it gives us the facts, it helps us make a better judgment call when it comes to moral dilemmas. But again, in the end, it can't tell you whether that judgment call is an ethical one. But also in the science community, you have people like Sam Harris, who's this neurologist, and he does a lot of work in meditation and religion and ethics. And he says that science and religion have kind of created this gap that you don't really need. That you have science over here who's just about facts and not about, intangible things, and you have religious ideas that are all about the intangible things. But he says there's a third option. There's this science of morality, that it's not just about being a secularist and saying that morals are subjective, and it's not just about religion where you get your morals from a piece of scripture, but there's a third option there, and it's somewhere in between. In fact, this is what he actually says. The only moral good worth talking about are those things which increase the well-being of conscious creatures, and that objectively right or wrong is grounded in facts about what will bring the most human flourishing. So when he looks at science and morality, he says, listen, the science of morality is this. What is the most flourishing that we could bring to people, and how do we do that? Which sounds great because it sounds like it marries science and religion kind of thing, but Sam Harris is a huge atheist. He doesn't believe in God. He actually thinks religions are dangerous. And so when it comes to like the human flourishing part, and this is where we get our morality and it points it back to science, I have to ask him this one question though. Why is it good for humans to flourish? I mean, it's such an obvious question that it's hard to answer, but why is that a good thing? Again, you're making a moral assertion that to human flourishing, that's a good thing and people ought to do that. But why? Is it because it's in our genes? Are we pre-wired to do that? But if we're pre-wired to do that, then it's not really a choice. It's just kind of an evolutionary thing, like whether you have blue eyes or brown eyes. It's not really your choice. So what makes it objective and not just an opinion, or just not wiring to say that human flourishing is a thing that we should all strive for? It stands outside of our physical realm. So who makes up those rules? Is it Sam Harris? Is it science? Or is it, again, something outside of human opinion? Because again, when you look at science, it's about, evolution is, survival of the fittest, but survival of the fittest doesn't mean the survival of the collective. It's the best of the best. I want to push myself to be the best so I can pass those genes on to, someone else who's the best, and then we can flourish. But not everybody, because the weak are going to be weeded out. I mean, that's what survival of the fittest is all about. And this is partly why science fails us to give, ethical answers to claims about morality or ethics or right and wrong or judgment calls. Science is one thing, and morality and ethics and religion are a completely different thing. And so when you try to marry the two and you try to use science to answer ethical questions, what you're really doing is committing a logical fallacy. The fallacy is called a categorical fallacy. And it basically means that you're putting one category of ideas into another category of ideas that doesn't actually fit into this category. Simple, right? But it would be like saying the color blue smells like, well, you can't really marry those two because blue isn't something that you smell, it's something you see. They're in two different categories. Or if I asked you, the melody of a song, how much does that weigh? Your brain can't wrap around that, because a melody of a song is something you hear. It's not something you physically feel and have weight to. So how are really science and morality in two different categories? What are those categories? What are those things that we're putting in each, thing? Well, think about science for a second. What does science actually do? Science tries to explain the things that we see. It tries to explain the world around us. Science tries to give us facts. Science is just a tool to help us understand the world or the natural world around us. It describes what we see and what we touch and what we smell. When we ask the question, what makes up water? Science. Why is the sky blue? Science. How fast can I get to In-N-Out if it's 5 miles away and I want like 5 miles per hour, but there's an incline of 5%? How long will it take me to get there? Science. Again, science deals with, observing how the world works, describing what's actually going on. But when it comes to moral things, again, the category is different because now we're talking about what someone should do, what someone ought to do, or what someone should not do. Should I obey the law? Is it a good idea to steal? Is it wrong to lie? In answering those questions, well, science can't give us the answers because they're ethical things. When you look at science, you can put it in this category of descriptive. It shows you what's going on. But when you look at morality, it's all about prescriptive. Those things that you should be doing, those things that you ought to do, those things that you shouldn't be doing. And going back to what Dawkins said about, science not being in the business of giving ethical claims, but helping us understand those things. I mean, science helps us by giving us the facts of what we're trying to figure out. I mean, you can take something like abortion or pro-life. Science can't tell us whether that's wrong or whether that's right, but it can give us more information that can help us make a better judgment call. Do the unborn baby and its mother have the same DNA? Are they the same thing? Or is that thing inside of that mother human? It can even give us some idea of when life actually begins. And when science begins to clarify all those little things, we can begin to answer those questions that science can't answer, like, is it valuable? Is it wrong or is it right? Is it true? Is it lovely? Is it beautiful? All of those types of things. But if science can't help us actually come to the conclusion of whether something's right or whether something's wrong or whether something's morally ethical or not morally ethical, how do we come to those conclusions? What tells us that something is wrong or right or something that we should do or shouldn't do? Well, to circle all the way back around, those things have to be founded in God. Because if morals are just relative, that you make your own morality, that you make what's true for you, but it might not be true for someone else, well, then we're just kind of left talking about opinions. And when you have different opinions, everything's like ice cream. There's no right or wrong answer, it's just preference. I mean, the most we could say is, well, I just wouldn't have made that decision. I just wouldn't have done that. That's not something I would do. But if you're saying that, then it's just kind of like saying, I would never wear overalls, which you might say to yourself, why would Steven wear overalls? Exactly, I wouldn't wear overalls. But why would you say that right now as an example, not wearing overalls? Because, I mean, you wearing overalls have nothing to do with what we're kind of talking about. It's not really relevant. Which kind of makes my point about morals being relative. If they're just relative, then nothing really matters about what you say. It's just your opinion. It's just ice cream. It's just vanilla versus chocolate. No one's really right or wrong. You might as well just be saying, I wouldn't wear overalls. You stating something that you wouldn't do or wouldn't do just because you're you, well, it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, unless you're really cool or powerful and then people want to be like you, so they start doing something or stop doing something. It's, Which brings me to my second point, though. Maybe it's the person with all the power that makes up the laws. Maybe it's the person with all the powers who make up what's right and what's wrong. I mean, our government makes laws and we follow them for the most part. And other countries have people in power that make laws and their people follow those laws. And those laws that are different than our laws. I mean, their rights are different than our rights and their wrongs are different than our wrongs. So maybe it is just the people who have all the power that make the rules and that's what we follow, right? Well, I think the problem that comes with that is, what if the person in charge, what if the person with all the power wants to do some really horrible things. What do you do then? Do you have the power to say that that's wrong? Because you don't really have any power. So do you just have to follow what they say? I mean, you can think of people like Hitler and the Holocaust and how he said, Jews were the enemy of German people, or people like Stalin or Pol Pot, who in just 4 years was able to, kill more than 2 million people. I mean, what would have happened if those people came out on top? I mean, what would have happened if Hitler won World War II? What would our morality look like? And would it be right for us to still believe that Jews were enemies of the German race? I mean, would it then be okay to kill somebody because of their ethnicity or the color of their skin, or just because they disagreed with you? I mean, that's what all the people in power thought. If everyone thought that around you, but you were the only person who didn't, would everyone else be right and you be wrong? Or would you be right and everyone else wrong? And I think we all know the answer to that question, that everyone else would be wrong. Because there are certain things that are just self-evident, that might doesn't make right. Might be able to enforce things, but it doesn't mean that the things that they are enforcing are good and lovely and true and right. So coming back to that question, do we as people define what's ethically wrong or what's ethically right? Do we make up our own truth? And I don't think so. Because when we come up with that idea, when we say, oh, truth is relative, it's just whatever you think it's, we always say that wrong or being right is relative to really the person next to us. I'm not that bad of a person because, well, look at them over there. Or I'm really good of a person, look at them. I mean, you might talk to a guy who steals, and the guy who steals says, listen, I'm not that bad of a person. I've never hurt anybody. And you go to the guy who's hurt somebody, and the guy's like, well, yeah, I've beat some people up, but I've never killed anybody. And you talk to the guy who's killed someone. He's like, yeah, okay, I killed maybe a couple people, but I'm no Hitler or anything. And it's like, well, where does it stop? Like, we're just comparing each other to other people who are just worse than us. I mean, there has to be a point where we say this is wrong, and it's not just a, well, he's done worse type of thing, so I can't be that bad. So when we look out into the world and we see that there are things that you shouldn't be doing and there's things that you should be doing, who defines those things? If it's not us, if it's not government, if it's not the person with the most power, who is it? Again, it has to be founded in God, which brings us to the argument about God, the moral argument in support of God's existence. And the argument for God's existence because of objective morals is really simple. There's only 3 points that you really have to remember. The first point being, if objective moral values exist, God must exist. The second point is, there are objective moral values that exist. And the third point being, well, if there are moral objective values that exist, God must exist. And we do see objective values that exist. And the third point is, well, then God has to exist. And when you look at this argument, there are only 2 places that people can really attack. It's either going to be the existence of objective moral values, or that those objective moral values aren't founded in God. And if those objective moral values aren't founded in God, well, then someone has to give a good explanation to where those things are founded on. Because as we just went through, it can't be founded in science, it can't be founded in ourselves, it can't be founded in the person who has the most power. So what's the next step? What's the next thing? Where are they founded in? And so if people come and they object to the idea that objective moral values don't exist, well, they might be able to make a case, but I think you'll find sooner than later that you'll find them backpedaling when they actually start to live this out. Because again, your ideas have consequences, and no one lives their life like there aren't objective moral values. But you will have people say that there aren't really any objective moral wrongs. There aren't things that people shouldn't do. They're just opinions, which you can bring up a few things like, well, if someone hates somebody because of the color of their skin, is that okay for them to do that? Well, they can say no, or they can say, well, it's just something I wouldn't do, which you can be like, what? Or is it okay for someone to torture an innocent baby for the fun of it? Well, now it becomes a little dicey just to say, well, that's something I wouldn't do. I mean, when are you going to draw the line? I mean, for me, that's a pretty hard line to be like, okay, torturing babies for the fun of it, that's a hard no. That's wrong in any culture, in any circumstance, in any society. I don't care what you say. And the crazy thing is, if someone says, yeah, I can see that okay and letting that happen, I would run. Because if anybody's okay with allowing that to happen, well, they don't need an argument. They need to see a doctor. They need to see a therapist, because that's not okay. But still, even if you find people who continue to say that objective moral values don't exist, that it's just a matter of opinion, you'll find that they'll soon be backtracking on what they said 5 minutes later, because sooner or later they are going to find themselves living as if there are objective moral values. And C.S. Lewis put it brilliantly when he said this: one might say that he does not believe in objective morality. However, the moment he is mistreated, he will react as if such a standard exists. When he denies the existence of an objective standard of behavior, the moment he is mistreated, he will be complaining, "It's not fair," before you could even say Jack Robinson. And so the next time you hear someone say that they don't believe in objective moral values, just lie to them, steal from them, take their money, cut them in line, punch them in the face. Actually, don't do that one. That's probably really bad. But really quickly, you'll see that they'll, object to that and say, what are you doing? That's wrong. You're not supposed to be doing those things. And another interesting thing about objective moral principles is that they're cross-cultural, things that all cultures will value or that all cultures will praise or despise. They're everywhere. Things like courage or standing up for the right thing. Now, what they consider to be courageous or what they consider the right thing might differ from what we say, but the principle remains the same. That courage is something to be honored, that not running away is something to be praised in some way. So now, I want you to step out for a second and think about the world that you live in. Think about the world that you step into every single day. Can you really think of anybody who doesn't live like there's not objective moral truths out there? Who just does whatever they want and thinks that nothing's going to happen because, well, truth is just a matter of opinion. Wrong and right are just preferences. They're just like ice cream. Chances are that you're not going to think of anybody. And if we can go out into the real world and we can see that there are moral truths, that there are moral laws out there, and it's not up to us, it's not someone else, we aren't powerful enough to think of those things, that it's outside of those things, well then the question is, if there's a moral law, who is the moral law giver? And this is why I think the moral argument is such a powerful argument or such a powerful tool, is because it's something that we all experience. The good and bad, the shoulds and the should nots, the wrongs and the rights, all of these things that we kind of know intuitively that we can share or at least experience with others. I mean, we can't help but feel wronged when someone has wronged us, or we can't help but feel wronged when someone else has been wronged. We want to stand up for them. We say, there has to be justice for that. Or to take it a step further, that justice is a good thing. But if it's us that sets that standard, well then there's no real standard at all, because every standard will fluctuate and it just becomes a matter of opinion. There's no real wrong or right. And since moral and ethics aren't physical things, science can't explain those things. Science can't give you the answer. It can give you facts, but it can't ultimately make that judgment call of whether it's right to do this or wrong to do that. So when we look out in the world and we see that these moral laws exist, I can't help but think that God is the best explanation for this. I mean, what other explanation is there? Again, it can't be us. It can't be science. So what's another option? Well, it's something higher than us. If there's a moral law, there has to be a moral lawgiver. If there's a watch, there has to be a watchmaker. That watch just didn't come together by itself. Someone had to design that. So again, when you look out in the real world, there are moral laws that exist. And when those moral laws exist, the best explanation for those is that God put them in place. So if we have moral laws and if God is the best explanation, then God must exist. So let me know what you guys think. Leave a comment, leave a message. If there are any other explanations of how morals are founded or where they're founded in, let me know. Maybe it's something that I've never thought about, or maybe I didn't make something clear, or maybe just something doesn't make sense, or maybe it just doesn't follow through. Like maybe I'm wrong. Tell me. Bye. Oh, and don't forget to come back next week, because next week we're talking about is how is one way the only way. Bye.